In the darkened woods near the top of the hill, which sits on the old Bailey Fisher farm, lurks a monster. One which waits for passerby behind shadowy trees. It is said to have come to the area from a faraway planet in a strange craft which landed on the hill one night long ago. The being on the hill emits a putrid smell and is always preceded by an acidic, foggy mist which can burn flesh from bone. If you're unlucky enough to find yourself on the hill after dark, you just might catch a glimpse of the monster wandering the forest, searching the skies for the rest of its kind. It is said that their return will spell the end of Flatwoods and the end of all humanity. In Braxton County, West Virginia, lies the village of Flatwoods. Whether whispered over morning coffee or told in hushed tones in school hallways, this is a place where tales are told. Often they tell of grisly murders on the streets of faraway cities or terrible accidents involving farm equipment. But just as often they tell of ghosts who wander abandoned haunts, waiting to startle unsuspecting victims. Strange, hairy beasts are said to hide in the forested hills and hollers, occasionally lumbering out into the open long enough to chase fearful children who made the mistake of staying out after curfew. On occasion, unearthly lights are spotted hovering in the skies over backwoods farmers' fields, just long enough to be seen before disappearing back to the distant regions whence they came. In a place like Flatwoods, stories become folk tales that are passed down from generation to generation like a family heirloom, rarely making their way out of the region where they were birthed. Each retelling takes on new elements, new pieces of a puzzle, still being shaped by the passing years. With most legends, it seems there is one or many kernels of truth, key details that form the foundation of a story that has become something far different in the years that followed the occurrence. In the tale of the Green Monster, one of those details is the May family. Ed and Fred May were present for the birth of this particular mythology, and in the years since it was first told, they've come to play the most crucial role. Witnesses to a legend.
Well, as far as for myself, it doesn't make any difference, whether people believe me or whether they don't.
No, like I say, it's up to the individual whether they believe us or they either believe us or they don't believe us. And it's immaterial to me.
The Mays lived in a small house just off of Depot Street, named as such due to the proximity of the West Virginia and Pittsburgh Railroad line, which ran nearby. Their mother, Kathleen, had grown up in the area and was well known and liked by Flatwoods residents. She was described as a playful and feisty woman, more than capable of caring for herself and her two young sons. The boys' father had moved to Michigan shortly after their parents' divorce. To understand how the legend of the Green Monster began, it's best to understand the area where it happened. West Virginia is known for its Mothman, a creature seen during 1966 and 1967 in the town of Point Pleasant, a being that chased kids in cars and appeared at bedsides of terrified residents of the town shortly before the collapse of a bridge and the loss of 46 lives. But the Braxton County monster existed long before the Mothman rose to prominence. It makes a certain kind of sense that Braxton County birthed such a famous legend. Braxton County sits at the geographical center of the state, and with its high, misty rolling forested hills, its shadowy hollers, and dark back roads, the county is covered in a blanket of mystery.
Braxton County contains incorporated towns of Flatwoods, Burnsville, Sutton, and Gasaway, along with numerous smaller unincorporated towns. There is about 50 miles or so of interstate that zigzags through Braxton County.
Flatwoods is a nice country community that everybody knew everybody. It's back to the old country West Virginia home now, country roads.
I'm originally from one county over, and my whole family's from there. I have some family that is from here, and they've been here since as long as they can remember. Other than the occasional transplant, it's just people that's lived here their whole lives.
The exact date of the founding of Flatwoods is unknown, but history does tell us that a church was founded in the area as far back as 1830. In 1902, Flatwoods was incorporated, and thanks to the railroad, which was extended through town in the late 1800s, the town thrived. The nearby town of Sutton, West Virginia, plays a key part in regional tourism and features a historic district that houses the Braxton County Visitors Bureau, as well as the historic Sutton Lake and nearby Elk River. Despite its obvious beauty and a number of prominent figures who grew up within the county limits, it has become best known for a shadowy, monstrous figure who was merely a tourist from worlds away.
There was a lot of people that made light of the monster, laughed about it, made jokes about it, but it was always in the background, always part of the folklore that a lot of small towns have. This monster business was a little more real than maybe some folklore in some towns, but it was interesting.
I knew about it, but even going through middle school and high school here, I'd always, you would hear it. You'd hear Flatwoods Monster or Braxton County Monster.
In small communities such as this, everybody knows everybody, or they have a family member that knows somebody down the road, or whatever the case may be. My family grew up in this general area. They were so terrified of the Flatwoods Monster that they were afraid to walk home from the school bus.
It seems like if you're from Flatwoods, you really know a lot about it. But if you're not, or if you didn't go to like the elementary school in Flatwoods, you might not know that much about it, which is a shame.
The author of this book, Annapolis-trained ex-Marine Major Donald Kehoe, says the saucers are not from this earth, that they far outperform any craft that man can build today.
After a 1 year's investigation, I believe that the flying saucers seen by veteran airline and Air Force pilots...
The Green Monster legend was born in September of 1952, and perhaps not coincidentally, at a time when alien-like craft and spaceborne monsters were in the public consciousness. Just 5 years prior, a pilot named Kenneth Arnold had sighted 9 unusual objects flying beside his plane, which reminded him of saucers skipping on water. Over the following months, the term flying saucers would grow to prominence while aliens and their transportation invaded pop culture. With the coming of a new era of film, so came the introduction of alien menaces. Science fiction films became the go-to genre, and each was centered around seemingly more and more bizarre creatures from the skies. Overseas, America was still entrenched in the Korean War, while at home, fears of communism and nuclear annihilation were part of everyday life. As the world became an increasingly fearful place, eyes turned to the skies overhead. For centuries, West Virginia residents have been recounting unusual aerial phenomena across the state. In 1950, a supposed UFO sighting occurred in nearby Mount Hope, West Virginia. Meanwhile, in neighboring states, including Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, sightings were being reported by civilians and military personnel alike.
Back then, it was awash with stuff. If something happened every day. My grandmother always said that, we're up on a ridgetop and they can watch us easier than they can anywhere else. And they know that people up here are not going to talk.
This whole area has had many reports of UFOs, even dating back to the 1800s, the whole state of West Virginia. One particular account happened in 1944 where a farmer reported finding all this wreckage on his property that wasn't normal material. And after telling his relatives and his family about what he had found, no one really showed much interest. So he simply buried it in the same gully where he buried his trash that he burned.
We do have the advantage of having pretty clear night skies. We have the opportunity to see strange things that may take place in the sky that others might not see.
My grandfather was on his way back to Ohio one night because he worked in Ohio at the time, and he saw a teardrop fall from the sky. It was huge. It looked like jelly or jello. They saw like this cigar-shaped UFO. She said it came right down to the house and took off over the hilltop. They used to see a huge red bouncing ball, what looked like it would bounce across the sky. They'd see lights coming out of the cemetery. One night my Uncle Audie was staying with her and they heard a noise over the hilltop and he thought it was somebody messing with something with the farm equipment. And he went out and just fired a shotgun up into the sky and his saucer rose and took off.
Airline pilots with thousands of hours experience have reported saucers coming within a few hundred feet of their planes, matching speed briefly, and then darting off at supersonic speed.
On September 13th and 14th of 1952, two pilots both recounted seeing a large, unknown craft streak past their planes. In Charleston, a United States Air Force B-29 bomber crew reported sightings of what appeared to be a fleet of bright, metallic objects racing past their plane for up to 15 minutes. None of this would have proven all that unusual to the residents of the Flatwoods area. Reports of strange activity in the hills around Braxton County and neighboring areas were so common that residents barely noticed them anymore.
My grandmother's name was Audrey Harper. She was going through an old box of papers and she said, "Oh, look at this." She said, "You need to read this." I said, "What is it?" She said, "Well, I wrote it when I was about your age." It's 3 pages that she typed on an old-fashioned typewriter. And it was just the stories that she had experienced. Back then, the roads were dirt and they get rutted and you couldn't get a car out. So you'd have to walk to the store 5 or 6 miles. She said it wasn't dark yet, it was about twilight, and her friend were going to the store. And they had to cross through this field. And they'd started down into the field and they saw what looked like a campfire up on the hill. And they thought, oh, it's just so-and-so fox chasing, that's all it is. And she said they got a little bit further and it turned into a ball of flame, a huge ball, and it floated off the ground. Well, that spooked them because they knew then it wasn't a campfire. She said before they could even look away, it winked out and it was a black figure 3 times as tall as a man. And she said it was twilight. She said I couldn't tell what it was, but it was solid black. There was no color to it. And it scared them, so they took off. And they crossed a barbed wire fence that she can't even remember crossing. And they got through the part of the field and they came to a gate. And her friend opened the gate and Grandma ran through and her friend turned back. And when she did, she said, "My God, Audrey, it's right behind us." And she took off. Grandma turned back to latch the gate and when she did, it was right there. And she couldn't tell anything, she just said it was solid black. The field they had to go through from the gate was full of boulders and rocks. She said you could not walk through it in the daytime without stumping your toe or stumbling or falling over it. So they ran through it and never saw nothing. Just through it like that. And after that, she never walked. Even if she had to do without, she wouldn't go to the store. She wouldn't go that way. And then a couple weeks later, she heard about Kathleen May and them, and she knew whatever she saw, it had to be a part of that.
Days after the Flatwoods event had made its way into the public eye, a writer and UFO investigator named Gray Barker would travel to the area to interview key witnesses. Later in life, Barker would again be tied to yet another piece of bizarre West Virginia history when he began his investigations into the Mothman sightings near Point Pleasant. Though Barker is considered to be a questionable resource when it comes to information relating to paranormal subjects, his look at the green monster sightings were eventually published in Fate magazine, where he described in great detail the eyewitness accounts of what transpired that evening in 1952. Barker was joined by Ivan T. Sanderson, a major figure in the study of unexplained phenomena and one of the forefathers of the study of unknown animals, or as it came to be known, cryptozoology. Sanderson would go on to study UFOs and strange creatures for decades, but seemed to take special interest in the Flatwoods Monster. In November of 1956, he would record his radio interview with New York's Long John Nebel.
The village of Flatwood is at one end of this little valley. It's ringed around by mountains. Now, through this valley runs a road, a blacktop road, going from north to south, also a railway line. And at the opposite end of this little valley to the village is a small railroad station. And there is a dirt road that crosses the rail tracks just by that rail station, then curves up round the back of one of these mountains and sort of peters out at a field. And up that road, stuck on the side of this hill, I would say, a very stony hill, are a number of dwellings. One of those houses is occupied by a family by the name of May.
On September 12, 1952, the skies around West Virginia were alive as 6 objects streaked overhead, coming from the north and heading in a southeasterly direction. 4 of the objects were tracked across the U.S. through eyewitness reports on trajectories that took them as far away as Alabama. One of these is said to have exploded in the midair somewhere over the nearby town of Gassaway, near the Elk River.
Well, we was at the playground at the Flatwoods Grade School, and it was a day just about like today, nice out, with a breeze. And while we was playing, we seen this ball of fire come across the sky.
This big flaming thing went over, and it looked like it landed right on the other side of the ridge. So we all went running up to see what it was.
Well, you got 5 or 6 boys that are some were in the range of 10 to 17 years old, and you know they're going to go see what happened.
There was Eddie, myself, Neil Nunley, Teddy Neal, Gene Lemon, Mother, and Tommy Harr. Tommy Harr was just a little squirt, I guess you would say, at that time, and he was in the back and short, and he didn't see anything.
That the kids all state categorically that this object, this large glowing object, which appeared to be about the size of a house, seemed to pause when it topped the hill and then to sink. Instead of going on down in the sort of trajectory, it stopped and sank slowly down behind the hill, and they could see this light pulsing behind the crest of the hill. And Nunn said, the 14-year-old said, come on, let's run up there. Something may have landed and we may be able to get something for the geological survey, which I think is pretty bright and intelligent.
It wasn't like a shooting star or anything real fast. I mean, it was like floating down, but it looked like a ball of fire, and it come down and over the ridge to where we could tell it went down, just over that ridge there, and we knew that land, and there was a flat up there, so. But hey, look at that, you see that shooting star or whatever, hey, it might have gold on it, let's go check it out.
So they made their way up to what is known now as Depot Street and started up the road.
We have to walk right by the house to go up the road where we was going, and we picked up my mom, and that's where he was a distant cousin. He was there visiting.
Gene Lemon, he was the older one. He was actually, I think if I remember right, in the National Guards at the time.
We just explained to him we saw something looked like it landed up over the hill, and they decided to go with us.
The community dog went along for the show, and they started up the trail to the Bailey farm.
Upon landing near the top of the hill at what was then known as the Bailey Fisher Farm, the object could still be seen by the group. Protruding from the earth near the rise, it was clearly visible as they began making their way toward it. What they saw in the distance seemed to be as big as a small house and emitted a strange, glowing orange light. Led by Mrs. May and the visiting Gene Lemon, the band began their ascent up the hill in the direction of the downed object.
Until we got up to where there was trees and brush and stuff, and then we slowed down. It was just dusk when we started. The time we got there and in the woods, it's considerably darker than the open fields. And so we slowed down like to a walk.
Well, going up the hill, we just went up the hill, and we didn't know, like I said, we didn't know what to expect, what we was looking for. And we just got up there at a certain point, and there it was.
They noticed this hissing noise and a fiery object below them, and it turned out to be a shape of an egg or a saucer, and it was hissing and whirling, and that's what they all focused on at first.
They said this thing had landed with the nose, the blunt end down, so it formed not exactly a pair, but it was more like an ace of spades, sort of standing up in the field, sticking up. All around this object there was a thick mist, looked like a ground mist, a patch of it, lying on the side of the hill. But the dog ran into this mist, going barking at this object, according to their story. He immediately set up a howl and took off practically with the speed of the light, down to the village, and was subsequently found having vomited all over a veranda and subsequently died.
And all at once there was a little noise behind them, and they turned, and there stood the monster.
And then we come to that gate, and there's an old wooden gate, wooden boards, and that's when we seen the thing.
And that's when we saw it, I don't know, maybe half a mile from the house where we was playing football.
They had this flash. They were looking at the object, and then suddenly one of the kids behind said, "Look, up in the tree." Now, there was one oak tree growing isolated right on the top of the ridge. Now this kid pointed up to this branch, and underneath the branch, apparently suspended in the air, was a creature or thing, or an object, about the size of a very heavy-set man. But the thing was turning slowly around, waving from left to right and right to left, as if it was searching the horizon with these beams.
He's 12 to 15 foot tall, just kind of hovering or gliding. He's black and green and red in color. His eyes glowed with fire or lights.
There was a big tree, where we seen it. And that's how we estimated 12 feet tall from where it was to the first limb on that tree. The tree's dead and gone now.
So what was it like when you actually saw the creature?
Well, when Gene's flashlight beam hit it, it lit up like a Christmas tree. We all noticed it, all at the same time. It wasn't in any bushes. It was right there, under the limb, out in the open, right in the roadway. The whole thing lit up instantly. I was less than 20 feet from the monster. It made a hissing sound, like frying bacon. Gene dropped the flashlight and screamed. He screamed so loud and fell back and stumbled over one of my boys and took off running. It was a hideous sight, and I wish I had not seen it.
They saw something that had the shape of a man, only a lot larger, and creature with claws. You know, they all drew similar pictures later for the press and that sort of thing.
What I saw, it looked like the B-2 rockets that the Germans flew over and hit London with. That's what it looked like, almost exactly. Of course, when we saw it, everybody was petrified, and you don't remember a whole lot.
The point I want to get across is it was nothing alive, and it was a mechanical thing. It was pointed at the top, and it had portholes, which I've said in every interview I ever had. It looked like on a ship porthole, and in behind that porthole there was light. You could see in behind, but I couldn't see anything. Of course, just one quick look and we was gone.
I do not have a theory. All I know, it was mechanical. I know it was a little early in history to see something like that, but other than that, I can't explain it.
It's my theory that something landed up there and they put what they call a sentinel down, because that was the only road exit that could get up to that place. But they put a sentinel down there.
Apparently, when the flashlight came on, the object tilted over so that these two little beams came down and concentrated on them, and then immediately began to silently drift through the air, sort of in a half circle, towards them and around to the left to go down from its left. So scared were they when this tremendous thing came towards them. They all took off. And I don't blame them when this thing started to sail through the air towards them.
Well, we wasn't anything till we saw it, and then we was, I don't know what you call it, afraid or confused or what, but everybody just turned around and took off.
And that's when we all run. There was another gate on down next to where the old house used to be, and it was about a 6-foot gate, and I think I read in the paper where my mother jumped that fence. She was athletic type, but not that athletic type.
We basically ran all the way to the house, and no one said a thing.
Much later on, after a considerable amount of questioning all over the district, we found a farmer who lived on a hill about 3 miles away, but he watched the big object, and he said that for a matter of 10 to 15 minutes it continued to pulse. And it pulsed the same colors, but getting redder and redder and weaker amount of light. And he felt very sure that the whole object itself was diminishing in size. And he said it finally disappeared about 20 minutes later in a pinpoint of light, and then it was complete darkness.
There was a guy that lived on the knoll across the valley from that. He seen, I think, come in, and he said he seen it take off. And then there was other people that said, well, I seen that thing go through the sky.
Like any good legend, with the passage of time, individuals claiming to have their own connection to the monster have come forward. Chapters are added to the lore, each filled with tales and theories, facts and fables. Over the years, more and more brushes with the bizarre have been recounted by area residents and outsiders alike.
Well, the story goes that George and Edith Snitowski were traveling home. They were from New York, and they traveled to Ohio to visit some relatives, and on their way back they had some extra time, so they took the scenic route. The route led them over here between Gasaway and Frametown. The car just stalled out for no apparent reason. After trying to start the car several times, they started smelling this strange odor, really noxious, fume, sulfur type smell. Well, George, thinking the car was on fire, jumped out of the car to check the engine, popped the hood, couldn't find anything. At the same time this was going on, a really bright flash of light happened, and it was over in the woods next to the road. So he got out, started going towards that light, smell getting worse. He was stumbling and became violently ill. He saw this glowing object in the woods. So he turned away from this object and started stumbling back to the car. At that time, his wife let out a blood-curdling scream. As he's going back to the car, well, he glanced back and saw something that scared the living hell out of him. He ran to the other side of the car, fumbled with the door, jumped back in the car, put his child and wife on the floor, cowering in fear. And George gave a description of what he saw of the creature as having no legs to be seen, and the lower half being a solid form.
The creature encountered by the Snitowskis on September 13th seems to lend some credence to the theory that multiple objects and strange creatures were visiting West Virginia that night. On September 13th, the National Guard out of nearby Gasaway was dispatched by the Air Force to investigate the mysterious incidents which had taken place the night before.
The original crash site at the Flatwoods Monster, what I find very compelling about that, essentially a crack team of Special Forces personnel from the West Virginia National Guard were sent into that area covertly by the U.S. Air Force. Then Captain Levitt was the the man in charge of the Special Forces unit in West Virginia, in the West Virginia National Guard. Now, they were activated almost immediately upon the crash. The group was separated into two teams. Captain Levitt and his men, approximately 50 to 60 strong, were sent into the Fisher Farm. The other half of the men were down along the Elk River looking for this supposed aircraft. The team searched all night. Captain Levitt and his group of men did find an impression in the ground that was approximately 20 feet in circumference, where impressions and grass were mowed over, where something apparently had landed on the Fisher Farm. Levitt's mission was to collect any type of evidence he could find. He found some type of greased type substance in the grass, smelt the grass during an interview he did. Many years later, when he was now retired Colonel Levitt, he said that the grass smelt of burnt sulfur, and he was ordered to send all the stuff post-haste back to Washington, D.C., to the Pentagon right away.
They called the local sheriff, and he was out on another call that night, similar. Down around Frametown or Strange Creek, they had reported that there was a small airplane flew into a hill and burned up, but they couldn't find any evidence that a plane had flew into the hill or that there had been fire. So they investigated that, and then the sheriff, who was Robert Carr, I believe, at the time, he came out and investigated.
I remember going up the next morning, and there's a lot of oil on the ground and some skid marks.
Some of the locals thought, well, you know, it was a farmer. He was up there. There hadn't been any tractor up there. There hadn't been any mowing done.
All the people that was there took pictures of it and took samples of the oil and stuff like that. Never did hear anything back from the samples of the oil, so don't know what that was.
The government gave them some sort of a bogus answer, as usual.
Kathleen May, later in life, told about a mysterious letter which came from the Pentagon shortly after the sighting, which claimed that the UFOs seen on September 12th were merely experimental rockets. Mrs. May couldn't recall the exact details of this letter, but did remember that it ended with a warning to keep quiet and not tell anyone anything about the event. If her recollection of the letter is accurate, then there's little doubt that its writer would be sorely disappointed when just days after the incident, Kathleen May and Jean Lemon, along with the local newspaper editor A. Lee Stewart, would appear on a television program called We the People. Their segment on the show also featured the first appearance of Mr. Stewart's rendering of the Flatwoods Monster itself, a piece of history which today still resides in Flatwoods.
Kathleen May and the Lemon Boy was away in New York on an interview with a TV show.
They was paid, somebody paid for a trip to New York to be on a TV show. That was paid for, but she didn't get paid any money. Everything was paid for.
I watched it, but back then TV was new and it was so snowy you couldn't see much. And the only thing I remember about it was that's where they give it the name of the green-eyed monster.
You know, the Braxton County Monster was always in people's mind, and people were concerned.
You seen something up there, you don't know whether it's still there or whether it left. You know, a few days after that, there was people who was interviewed that seen it take off. I was afraid then. I think we all were.
It was about half and half. It was about half the people made fun of it, half the people said they saw things go over and they believed it, so it was pretty much split.
After school, there'd be some kids that would bring it up. The biggest thing that they would say, my mommy and daddy said, that kept them out of trouble, you see. And my mommy and daddy said, y'all made all that up.
In the days to follow the encounter, newspapers across the United States ran articles about a run-in between West Virginia locals and a bizarre, Frankenstein-like, fire-breathing thing. The Green Monster, as it was most commonly referred to, was reportedly anywhere from 7 to 17 feet tall, with a blood-red face. Some articles made mention of the overpowering odor given off by the creature, or the acidic mist which hung in the air around the downed craft and lumbering alien. Many articles quoted Kathleen May as having said that the scent was so pungent that it caused vomiting for hours after the encounter. Even the number of witnesses varied in multiple publications, with many of them ascribing the wrong names to those that were there. The object that was spotted streaking across the sky shortly before its potential pilot was seen was treated as little more than a footnote. The one thing that remained somewhat consistent across the published stories at the time was the encounter itself.
Oh, it's different. It's entirely different what's been reported and written about over the years. Yes, there's a lot of things in there that's not factual.
They want to sell papers. Controversy makes news. You see it more than ever today.
A lot about everybody getting sick and a dog dying and what it had two big green eyes and all this, and none of that is true.
We dug out a lot of ground holes with that dog after that.
There was a lot of people that believed that they seen something, and they really believed the story. And then there was an element that opposed the story, that didn't believe anything that anybody said. But there was something happened. And the story has continued over the years. I mean, it hasn't gone away. It's just as prevalent today as it was 65 years ago when the incident happened. It'll be 65 years this fall.
In the years since the encounter with the Flatwoods Monster, multiple interpretations of who or what the creature was, along with its reason for being in the area, have emerged. The frequent, skeptical response is that the Flatwoods Monster was simply an owl, glimpsed sitting on a tree branch, which became a horrifying creature in the wild imaginations of a group of hillbillies. Another theory is that the Flatwoods Monster was only one soldier, which appeared across the U.S. that night, a scout for a coming alien invasion. Drawing parallels to the day the Earth stood still is the idea that the creature seen was simply an innocent visitor to a terrifying and alien planet called Earth, who was welcomed with fear and anger by primitive Earth creatures. The newfound attention on the May family, thanks to their infamous brush with the green monster, proved to be the biggest drawback of the entire event.
In the past, I would say there could have been times in the past where the story could have been in danger of being lost, but I think the way it stands now, I think absolutely not. There's just too many people that found interest in this story, and maybe they've never even set foot in West Virginia, but you can Google everything.
And this story still scares people today because it's passed down generation to generation. When it's passed down like that and it keeps going on and on over these generation after generation, it affects folks.
Local interest has grown significantly. I've noticed a really increase in civic and local pride surrounding the monster, where maybe 15, 20 years ago you wouldn't have had that.
Kathleen May, the lady that put Flatwoods on the world map, that's important to me. That it's, there is a Flatwoods, West Virginia,
It's not so much whether they believe it or don't believe about it. It's just accepted. It's part of our folklore in Flatwoods, West Virginia.
In recent years, a strange addition to the saga of the Braxton County Monster has been its resurgence in popular culture, appearing in television programs, as children's toys, on album covers, and video games. The creature has found its own version of stardom that it never reached, even at the height of the monster hysteria of 1952. In each new interpretation, small facets of the original creature's description can still be seen, yet it continues to change in each retelling, to evolve, like any good legend does. Braxy has been embraced on a global scale, possibly more so even than in the town that the monster made famous.
It just looks like nothing else. Because of that, and because it's not copyrighted, you can throw it into a game as a boss. So you have this cool looking character that's already been designed for you. And it's been featured in, I know there's a Zelda game where it's featured, and there are several Japanese, maybe Japanese only releases that it's been featured in, like on NES and Super Nintendo, but it's way more than I ever thought there would have been.
They suffered a lot of ridicule. I have personally tried to talk to the May boys about what they saw, and they just wouldn't talk about it. They just didn't want to be an object of ridicule. Pretty much, the witnesses clammed up after the sighting.
I'm like my brother. I like to forget the whole thing. The only thing that I want to get the word out is actually what we seen. It wasn't a monster. It was a mechanic or something or other. But I would like to publicize it for the town of Flatwoods and for Braxton County and for the state of West Virginia.
I don't really think about it. To be honest with you, I wish it never happened. I wish it never happened, and I wouldn't have to think about it. I wouldn't have to explain to people all the questions I get asked and all that. I'd rather just go away. It's something you can't prove, and it just all comes down to trust, and there's just no point in talking to everybody about it. They got opinions. You're not going to change your opinion one way or the other.
Perhaps it's difficult now to see where it all began. In a small village in the hills of rural West Virginia called Flatwoods, with some kids playing football on an autumn evening, with a family who would become characters in a folktale they never wanted any part of. Recently, the Bailey Fisher farm property was bought. The owner has since declared it off limits to the public, and the tree where the sighting took place has rotted and died. In 2009, Kathleen May passed away at the age of 89. And while it is thought that Ron Shaver may still be alive, of the original Braxton County monster witnesses, it is only known as fact that Fred and Ed May still survive. Still, the legend remains. And while kernels of truth are retained in the telling of their story, the events that touch the lives of the May family have become something more, a modern myth.